Welcome to Israel. Why is the Middle East important? We Christians are the Notzrim, according to most Jews today. We are the watchers on the wall. Our purpose as members of the Commonwealth of Israel is to serve and protect God's people. After the formation of the world, God enacted a plan, and that plan began in the Middle East at the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And that plan concludes in that same place. The context of the entirety of God's plan begins and completes in and with Israel. There is no denying that, nor refuting it if you are a Jew or a Christian, and the anthropological evidence verifies it. For the purposes of this podcast, Israel is both a nation and a people. Welcome back, friends. This is Jeff Pelletier along with Neil Johnson, and this is Israel. Why is the Middle East important? Let me get that right. Why is the Middle East important is the name of our podcast, Israel. Why is the Middle East important? And Neil, I wanted to ask you a question before we get into our subject today, which is about the book of Judges, by the way, folks. We're going to be talking about the book of Judges. But Neil, why does God repeat himself?
Well, that is called remez, and he repeats himself, in my opinion, because you can link together all those different, almost same verbiage, sometimes like verbiage, same concepts, and you can get a bigger picture.
Okay, so that he repeats himself so that we can fit those pieces together.
That's my opinion.
That's your opinion?
Yeah.
My opinion is that we're blockheads.
Yeah, and that's perhaps true as well. But certainly, this idea of the Bible, I forget the term, but it self-examines itself. It self-repeats itself. It self-verifies itself. And that's why a lot of times believers, Jewish or non, will say, if God said it once, that's enough.
It should be, right?
It should be enough. And yet, you can get a much bigger picture than just if he says it once, you can come to a wrong conclusion than if you put together a whole bunch of verses and you have a concept.
There you go. So another thing that I was thinking the other day before we get into the book of Judges is the idea that God is in the redemption business and that the Bible is a book of redemption.
Sure.
Right? So why do we need that? Why is God in the redemption business?
Well, I think we get to read that almost from the very beginning, that the earth was created, and almost immediately the inhabitants, our forebears, messed it up. And whether that was with some help from outside entities, that seems to be the case. And for some strange reason, as we always say, God still likes mankind, loves mankind, and wants to bring them back to what they once had. And we continue to screw it up. We continue to make that same mistake over and over, it seems. Right, and we're just men. We're not created beings. We're not angelic beings. But even of the angels, it says, speaking of man, they desired to look into these things, meaning these things being, why does God care about them? Why doesn't he just get rid of them? Why is he patient? All these attributes of God that come with this idea of why this redemption. And the redemption is because, for some reason, King David asked the same thing in Psalm, what is man? Why do you care?
That you would be mindful of him.
You would be mindful.
Exactly.
And for some reason, thank God, God is concerned about mankind.
Yes, he is. So that brings me to it's going to bring me to Judges here in one second. But before I go there to Judges, I want to. We were talking this morning in a Bible study about the idea that 70 people ended up in Egypt during the great famine with Joseph. 70, and those 70 people were redeemed from a famine. Right. So there it is. There's another example in the redemption business, right? And they were saved by their son, the son of Jacob. Right. Joseph. Right? He saved them. Yeah. Type of Messiah. Right. There it is again. He's repetition and redemption.
And Joseph is perhaps the clearest type of Messiah of all the types of Messiah there is. He was gone for a period of time. He looked like a foreigner. He seemingly didn't speak Hebrew. in other words, his brothers, Israelites, didn't even know who he was, but some painted up Egyptian. And that's like a lot of Jews today. They look at some picture of Christ and on somebody's mantle, let's say, and they see a 6'4" blonde-haired Scandinavian,
with
right?
blue eyes,
with
yes.
blue eyes,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes.
And that is not entirely accurate, but everything Joseph did, that is a very much a picture type of what Messiah did and has done and is doing in our day.
And Noah was a type of Messiah, and right?
Absolutely.
And then Joseph, and then Moses was a type of Messiah. And God is in the redemption business. And so, folks, the reason I'm bringing this up with Neil right now for you, it's for you and for me as well, and for Neil, is that God repeats himself for a reason. He wants us to get it. He wants us to live it. He wants us to be it. He wants us to really grasp this. Right? Son of a gun, in the book of Job, in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land that I had promised to your fathers. Who was that? That was Abraham. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. So no matter how many times you screw up, no matter how many times things don't go well, no matter how many times things go badly, I will always give you a way back to me.
Right, and not the church, quote unquote,
right.
But he's speaking to Israel. And by the way, it is Judges, not Job.
Judges, that's correct.
Did
I say Joel?
You said Job.
I did?
And that's okay, because there is quotes from Job as well.
Put those words back in my mouth.
But it's Judges 2:1, and God says, I will never break my covenant with you. Well, who was he talking to? He was talking to Israel.
Yeah.
So, again, and we've said this before, if he could break his covenant with Israel, he could simply and easily break it with the church.
Of course.
The non-Jewish church as well.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. But because we know that through repetition that God is a person of his word.
Of his word.
That we have no fear of that.
We have no fear of that ever happening, and he repeats that particular promise of all of his covenants, but certainly to the land, the land covenant, over and over and over.
Over and
many
over.
Times throughout many generations, throughout many centuries, through many men, prophets of Israel. And it's clear that land was God's land and belongs to the descendants of Abraham through Isaac and through Jacob.
Through Jacob, there you go. Okay, moving on. So in this idea of the system of judges, which God created as a form of government for his people, and there were many judges that were notable. And Ruth was one, and Samuel was one, and they were notable people, and God endowed them with wisdom to make good decisions on his behalf. And that didn't happen until Moses created that system. So Neil, in the book of Judges, where it begins with that relatively soon in the book, it talks about that. Why do you suppose God leads off with that?
Well, I think that the first judge, of course, was Othniel, and he's one of the lesser known, but he was the first.
He was a pretty important guy.
Well, they were all very important because you have this cycle of Israel falls into sin, God redeems them. Israel falls into sin again, God redeems them. Israel falls into sin, God redeems them. He's not happy with it, and sometimes it's very clear in the book of Judges. He's not happy. But nonetheless, he continues his word. He redeems and rescues Israel from great peril. And our character we're going to talk about is Jephtha.
Jephtha,
and he's one of the lesser known.
No relation to me.
No relation to Jeff, right? In the book of Judges, there are the better known, Deborah and Gideon and Jair, who killed Sisera and Samson. Those are probably better known judges. But in the book of Jephtha, it does give something for our listeners. You said
the book of Jephtha?
The book of Judges. And the judge Jephtha.
Jephtha, okay.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I did it. You did it. It's good.
And we do it continually, right?
More than we should, actually. But go ahead.
And that's something that it's not just by accident what he's recorded, what Jephtha is recorded as being and doing for Israel.
Okay. Well, and what is that?
Well, he is one of the judges that rescued Israel. And they all rescued Israel over a period of about 450 years.
Over and over again.
Over and over and over again. So if
again.
God was done, he could have been done any time up till Jesus' birth, when some replacement theologians say that's when God finally had enough and he switched or whatever.
He's in the redemption business. He isn't. He does it.
He does. And all of the judges, they were appointed by God to rescue Israel from the evil plans of Israel's oppressors.
Right.
Well, during the, for instance, kind of like Jephthah, God redeeming and rescuing Israel, during the Independence War in 1948 of Israel, a town, a very famous town in the northern Galilee is called Safat. Safat was liberated in an inconceivable victory during the War of Independence. The chief rabbi of the town gave 2 reasons for this miraculous victory. One was a natural course of events, and 2 was a divine miracle. But the rabbi went on and said, the miracle was that the Jews prayed to God to intervene on their behalf. That was the miracle. The natural course of events was that God answered the prayers. So
that's a very interesting way to express that.
Was by the chief rabbi of Safat, who said, 2 things happened here: a divine miracle and a natural. The miracle was that the Jews prayed. The natural course was that God rescued them.
Because he would.
Because he would.
It's just an automatic effect. It's going to happen.
Yeah, it doesn't mean God's happy with everything. Right. We know that from other
But it's not a miracle.
But it's not.
Because he's in the redemption business.
Because that's what he does.
That's what he does.
Right.
That's very good. Excellent. Excellent. The book of Judges follows the book of Joshua, and it occurs after the conquest of the land of Israel, right?
Correct.
Now, you talked about Deborah and Gideon and Yair. They're all judges, right?
They are. Yair wasn't a judge, but she did kill Sisera she drove a stake through his temple, if you will, and as Deborah said to Barak, her general, I'll go with you, because he said, you must go with me, but if you do, a woman's going to get the glory that you would have otherwise gotten. And sure enough, Yair, she is the one who killed the general that came against Israel. She drove a stake through his head.
Over the 450 years that we're talking about here, Israel does what is not pleasing to God off and on, all right? And invaders come and go, and they oppress the Israelites, and the Israelites call upon God, and he answers them every single time.
Every single time.
Okay. So, but you're saying that today's chaos that's going on in Israel is new and different.
Right.
Why is that?
And what I'm saying is today's chaos concerning Israel is new and different in that some people think it's new and different. But it's not new and different.
I see.
What has been will be again. We always say that. There's nothing new under the sun. Is there a case where one can say, look, Jeff, look, this is new? In other words, the present war. No. This stuff has already happened in ages past in some form or some event. You've seen it before. Thus, our story of Jephtha, when we get to speaking more specifically about what he did.
So let's talk about Jephtha. So Jephtha was the Gileadite? How do you say that?
Gileadite, yeah.
Gileadite, there we go.
Yeah.
And a mighty man of valor, it says in Judges 11:1, and he was the son of a prostitute.
That's correct.
So he had all that going for him.
That's correct.
Yeah.
and what we have to realize is that, and the whole purpose of talking about Jephtha is to show that, look, God is faithful, and God rescued Israel in the past, and it will happen again today, even though it's sometimes because it affects us, and I'm saying all of us, our listeners and you and I, we think it's different, we think it's new, but it's not. As far as
and before you go forward with that, and don't forget your place there, but that's why we started off this podcast the way we did. To validate the fact that God is in the redemption business. He repeats himself over and over. He never fails to live up to his word and his covenant to the people, we ought not be surprised that God is rescuing people, and that he will do it again. And he proves himself over and over and over. We fail over and over and over, but God continues to prove himself.
Yes, and that's exactly right, Jeff. And you and I can watch CNN or any news we care to watch or don't watch, but we can assume that all this catastrophe in the U.S., all of this upheaval, all of this anti-Israel sentiment is new, and it's not new. It's all happened before, and we can be overwhelmed. We can say to ourselves, how will we survive? What should I do? What can I do? Yeah. It's different. It's new. But no, it's not new. It's horrible. It's not God's plan, but we can be assured as much as we can that, hey, this has happened before, and what we're seeing is nothing new. It's exactly what God said in the Psalms. The nations rage. They hate me. And that's what we're seeing. That's in Psalm 2, by the way, where it says
and God equates rage. God. He doesn't equate himself with Israel, but he does equate Israel with himself.
Yes, over and over
and over. They are me. They are my people.
Right. That's exactly right. And this whole idea of why does it go out of its way to say he was the son of a prostitute? Seems like the Bible goes out of its way often to say a son of a prostitute, prostitution, something.
Yep.
And yet we see both in Jephtha, of course, but also in the lineage of Messiah was prostitutes or prostitution. Called out, expanded, amplified, because the sin of prostitution was perhaps the most, if you would say, egregious sin known to the Israelites. That was just unfaithfulness.
He calls Israel a harlot a couple times.
He does. He absolutely does. Yeah. And in some of the minor prophets, he says, you played the harlot. You are a harlot. Yeah. You're like a harlot to me.
Right, exactly.
So we see this here, that Jephthah was literally the son of a prostitute. And that tells us a couple things too, Jeff. One, we're going to see this great man. It says he's a great man. He's a great man of valor, but he was the son of a prostitute. That's quite amazing. In other words, nobody is above redemption in the Bible. This whole issue that you said, why does he do? He's in the redemption business.
That's right.
Even the son of a prostitute, even a prostitute herself, because many few didn't redeemed, they were all restored, and they're mentioned by name. So here we have again Jephtha in the Bible being called out specifically. He was a mighty man. He delivers Israel.
Now Jephtha, in this story we're going to talk about today, has a correspondence with the king of the Ammonites.
Right.
And the Ammonites were the incestuous
That's right.
product.
That's right.
Again, a sin issue, right? Between Lot and Lot's youngest daughter.
That's exactly right.
Wow.
The Ammonites were, and we've talked about this before, the Ammonites were the product of that incestuous relationship between Lot, yes. However you want to pronounce it, right?
Yes.
The nephew of Abraham and his youngest daughter.
Wow.
Of all things, can you imagine? Just so...
But they do attack Israel.
Yes,
they are their enemy.
Yes, they are their enemy. And as we read about in Judges, different enemies. But in this case, with Jephtha specifically, it talks about the Ammonites. And one of the things it says about the Ammonites is they were the enemies of Israel and wanted the land of Israel. So in other words, nothing is new under the sun. They were foreigners. Yes, it talks about Philistines and Midianites and others of that area of Canaan or around the present-day Israel, in or around the land, had come against Israel. But God always delivers them. And one of this group was the Ammonites, who were the product of this incestuous relationship. But even so, God didn't say, boy, that makes me ill. I'm done with you. In other words, no matter what your station in life, no matter what you've experienced, you always have the hope, the promise that God will be faithful. He's above our thoughts.
It's amazing. You know, the theme that I'm taking from that is that God loves people, but he hates their sin.
That's correct.
It's not that he hates them. He hates their sin. He hates what they do. He doesn't like when they do things against his will, but he loves the people.
That's true. There's just no doubt about it. And it's really hard when you're involved in some sin because it's human nature. We want to wait the appropriate time. We want to do the appropriate afflictions to ourselves, and then we feel better, and then maybe we'll approach God again, or maybe we won't.
Yeah.
But God already knew what you'd do before you even did it.
I know.
So it becomes one of those things. But you had mentioned, why does Jephthah engage in this?
What is the point of that discussion?
Correspondence with this king of the Ammonites.
Yes.
Well, you could ask yourself, okay, got it. Jephtha repeats the king's position, the Ammonite position, all their grievances, all their wants.
Yeah.
But Jephtha, if you read this, starting in about chapter 11, I think is where Jephtha first is said, of Judges.
Yeah.
The question is, why? Why would Jephtha start engaging in this course of interplay with the king of the Ammonites? The Ammonites wouldn't, and they didn't, listen to the points put forward.
And the purpose of his correspondence, they didn't listen to it, but the purpose of his correspondence was unity. He was trying to not be enemies.
Right. In other words, why engage them to hear their side of the story? So the unity was not necessarily because he thought it would change the Ammonites' position. It didn't. But Israel needed to hear. They are the ones that needed to read and hear and see the response and remember their God-given history, that they are the rightful heirs to the land of Israel, and not listen to the narrative of the enemy. In other words, think of this example, Jeff. Think if the West listened to the many grievances and demands of the Germans and the Japanese and Russia during and after World War II. Okay, then you'd say, did we listen to them? Well, we didn't. It doesn't mean they didn't have legitimate arguments, but why listen to them? And this is what you have in the book of Judges, in Jephthah in chapter 11, is he wrote and said, why do you do these things? Why are you attacking us? Why do you want this land that we've now had for well over 300 years? What are you doing? And it wasn't so that it would change the Ammonite position, because then it was really rule of the strongest. Whoever was stronger was the ruler. It was to get the Israelites to develop unity among the Israelites to, wait a minute, we have a right to this land. This was given by God. This was given to us before any encroachers, if you will, came into the land given to Abraham and took over this area.
So this is applicable today. Is it not? It's applicable exactly today.
That's exactly what it is. There's nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new.
Today you could say, okay, I will take the present and call them Ammonites, call them Midianites, call them Philistines, call them whatever you want, inhabitants of the land. They have their objections and their narrative.
They want the land, and from the river to the sea.
They want the land.
They want that land.
And they want it to be Judenrein. That's a German phrase that means Jew-free. Free of all Jews.
Wow.
And if you kill Jews, well, they deserve it.
Right.
That's the narrative of the modern day Philistines, if you will, or Ammonites.
It's not theirs to have, is it?
But it's not
theirs to have. It's none of their business, as my mom used to say.
Biblically speaking, God said, it's my land, and I give it to you. And he gave it to Abraham first in about chapter 15, I think. Where he said, I'll give you this land. But then he repeats it. He repeats the promise both to Isaac and then again to Jacob, first to Isaac in Genesis 26, and then he repeats it again to Jacob in Genesis 28, so that you won't be confused as to anybody, because these are Semitic peoples. Right? They're Semitic, but he gave it to a specific family lineage that comes down to the Jews.
I can hear my preterist friends in the audience right now yelling at their smartphones as they listen to this and saying things like, but the new covenant takes away all of that. The new covenant, it's Jesus, it's a brand new thing. Everything is new. What's the matter, Jeff? Don't you understand what's going on? But then they haven't actually read the covenants.
Right.
They haven't actually read them.
Right.
There's no obsoleteness to those covenants.
Right.
That's a forever.
Yeah.
It's forever. How long is that?
Right. Well, some people, preterists, would think until Jesus came. And that is the problem.
But that's not forever, is it?
Over and over and over, it's written through the prophets, through the centuries, as I said.
Yeah.
You're right in this case specifically to the land.
And look at what Israel did with the Gaza Strip, right? How many years ago did they give that up?
They walked out and gave the whole thing over in about the year 2005.
2005, they captured the Gaza Strip in one of their wars.
That's right.
And it was theirs anyway, right? God gave it to them. They got it, but then they gave it back. Not gave it back, but gave it over to Hamas and the Palestinian Palestinians,
Authority, which the present modern day Philistines, if you will, they voted in by vote. And there's never been one since, nor there has
only one.
There was one vote for the Palestinian Authority too.
Yes.
They've never had other votes. They have one choice. But they voted in Hamas to take over that Gaza Strip, and the Jews. There's no Jews in the Gaza Strip.
None.
They can't be there.
No.
But there's Jews, there's Arabs all over
There's
Israel.
Palestinians that work in Jerusalem every day.
And powerful people. They're judges, they're politicians, they're everything. But there are no Jews,
in Gaza.
None allowed in Gaza. None.
So
you can't be a Jew and live there.
But let's go with what happened here on October 7th, right? Where I was going with it, Neil, is that Israel gave it away. Weren't supposed to. It's their land, right? But in order for peace to be, they give it away. They give it to the Palestinians, right? As a gesture of goodwill, right? And peace, there is no peace.
Right.
It comes back. They actually made a mistake, and it came back to get them. It came back to hurt them.
Well, that's not the first time, if you will, that Israel has made a mistake. And that's what the whole book of Judges is about, is Israel believes in God during the period of one of the great judges, 9 to 12 of these judges over 400 plus years. And they're God believers. They are full of God until that judge dies. And then they go into sin of some sort. And then evil approaches them, and they call on God, and God rescues them. Again, because God says, I will not break my covenant, my word with you. And that's Israel, not Christians. You said your preterist friends would say, haven't you read it? God did not make something out of whole cloth. Jesus himself, as we showed many times, referenced the Old Testament. That's why you see it many times again when you said, why is it many times? Because it's in many different ways that you can finally maybe get, well, the picture of faithfulness is God's faithfulness. It's to Israel. It's not to the church.
Not to the church, because the church is part of the commonwealth of Israel, and if they would get that straight, then it would be good. Everything would be great, because we would see the church as a Christian. I would see my place in God's plan as a watcher on the wall, right? What is Notzrim? We're the Notzrim, and we're the protectors, and that's our role, and we blow it. But the other thing I wanted to say, Neil, is that Israel is not without sin.
Right.
They got the land back. And they gave it away. That was a sin. That was wrong. It was against God's plan.
And that's what we've talked about before. And it's a concept or a principle in Scripture that God seemingly judges all people on really one issue. How did you treat my people, Israel? And that's what Jesus himself says in Matthew 25. He says, if you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, you've done it to me. Now, you can take that word brethren and make it mean a bunch of different things, and you can apply it to Christians, and certainly you should, but it's being part of the commonwealth. The main word translated my brethren is my brethren, right? It's not Christians, it's not Notzrim, but yes, you can extend that covenant out, that understanding out, and that's all we're trying to do when we say that. But Jesus made it very clear. When he said, when you've done it to the least of these, my brethren, my brothers. And again, you have to say, well, who was he speaking to when he said that? Well, he was speaking to Israel. He wasn't speaking to some Gentiles, because he only went to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, it says. I go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Christians, that's what Notzrim, non-Jewish Christians are. We are part of the commonwealth of Israel.
Now, if someone in our audience were to read the story of how do you say
Jephtha.
Jephtha. Read that story, and where does that begin? In the 11th chapter of
Right.
Judges? Okay.
Correct.
So if they were to read that story, right, you're saying that what they would get from it is Jephthah is having correspondence with the king, the Ammonite king, with the intent of unification. But what actually happens is that causes Israel to reflect on who it is and its own covenant with God, and it rights the ship, in a sense.
Right.
Because even though he's trying to do a quote-unquote good thing, just like they did when they tried to give Gaza back, trying to do a good thing, they're also reminded, hey, we have a covenant with the eternal God for this land. And they respond. They respond to it, and the lesson they get is, no, we're not going to be unified with these Ammonites.
And we're not going to give them any of their demands or any of their wishes after all this period, which it becomes clear as you go on. That's exactly what he's trying to show, is there must be unity. Without unity, you're easily broken. If you're in unity, you succeed. And that's what he wanted Israel, the Israelites, to understand, is God, who can't break his covenant, gave you the land, and it's yours to inhabit, and it's yours to keep. But people who aren't in the covenant or don't care about the covenant, they rage.
Neil, sometimes the question is more important than the answer. And you were talking about how a lesser people can be strong if they're united, and they can succeed when they should be defeated because they're united. And to illustrate the power of the question, why don't you tell us that?
Correct. I was discussing with you a story that it's a well-known story of a rabbi who was walking home late at one night, and a German guard during World War II, he's walking home late at night, and a German guard shouted, "Halt! Who goes there?" And the rabbi stopped, and he thought to himself, and he asked the guard, "What did you just ask me?" And the guard said, "Who are you, and where are you going?" And the rabbi thought of that. Who am I, and where am I going? And he said, "I will pay you if you ask me the same questions every night." And that's the unity that Jephtha wanted to bring. That the question and the understanding.
Who are you?
Who are you? You are the Son of God. You are promised this land. I cannot give it to anybody else. I do not give it to anybody else. They are interlopers. They don't have a right to the land. And that's what Jephtha wanted Israel to understand, that they have the right. They are the natural inheritors of this land of the promise, this promised land. And that's why Jephtha wrote to the king of the Ammonites, not to change their mind, as we said, because it didn't, but so that Israel would hear and read and see and go, yeah, wait a minute, God gave us this land. God told us we'd have it. God anointed us through his divine providence to inhabit this land, and so we will.
Stay tuned for a special Hebrew blessing at the end of every episode, including this one. This has been a great discussion. I look forward to how it continues to unfold. As you can tell, Neil and I enjoy talking about the subject as it helps us to get to the root of the matter about God and why Israel and the Middle East are so important. Thank you for listening to this podcast, and we would love to hear from you. Visit us at our home at podbean.com. Israel, why is the Middle East important? That's podbean.com. Israel, why is the Middle East important? And you can find us any place great podcasts can be found. And you can find us on Facebook using the same title. And you can email us at whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com. That's whyisthemiddleeastimportant@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you like what you hear, please invite your friends to the conversation. You know, one thing Neil and I always say to each other is, I don't know, because it is by having an opinion, yet holding it with an open hand, that we continue to grow. Shalom. See you next time. Wait for the blessing.
ויברכך אדוני וישמרך. יאיר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונך. שא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום.